What if I told you that somewhere in the misty highlands of Scotland, beneath centuries of soil and legend, lies the answer to one of history's greatest mysteries? A mystery so profound that it changed the entire course of the Roman Empire forever? Picture this. It's a 120 CE, 5,000 elite Roman soldiers, battle-hardened veterans who had conquered enemies across 3 continents, march into the Scottish wilderness. They carry with them golden eagles, the sacred standards of Rome, symbols of imperial power that were never meant to be lost. But here's the chilling part. They never came back. Not a single soldier, not a single standard, not even a body. The 9th Legion, Legion Hispana, one of Rome's most celebrated military units, simply vanished from the pages of history. And their disappearance didn't just end with 5,000 missing men. It triggered a chain of events that would ultimately lead to the fall of the greatest empire the world had ever known. But wait, before we dive into this incredible story, let me ask you something. Have you ever wondered what it would take to make an entire legion of Roman soldiers disappear without a trace? Keep that question in mind because the answer will shock you. Today, we're going to uncover the truth behind the lost Roman legion that changed history forever. We'll explore the evidence, examine the theories, and reveal how this single event created ripples that would be felt across centuries. To understand the magnitude of what happened, we first need to understand who these men were. The 9th Legion wasn't just any military unit. They were legends in their own right. Founded around 65 BCE during the late Roman Republic, the 9th Legion had a reputation that struck fear into the hearts of Rome's enemies. Their official name, Hispana, came from their distinguished service in the Spanish campaigns, where they proved themselves as one of Rome's most effective fighting forces. But here's what makes their story even more remarkable. These weren't just soldiers, they were Caesar's men. When Julius Caesar crossed the Rubicon in 49 BCE, starting the civil war that would end the Roman Republic, guess who was marching beside him? The 9th Legion. Think about that for a moment. These soldiers had witnessed the transformation of Rome from republic to empire. They had seen Caesar's rise and fall. They had served under Augustus, the first emperor. By the time they reached Britain, they were carrying over 180 years of military tradition. Now here's a question that might surprise you. What do you think was the most important thing a Roman legion carried into battle? Their swords? Their shields? Their siege equipment? Wrong. It was their eagle standard. The aquila, or eagle standard, was more than just a symbol. It was the soul of the legion. Romans believed that losing your eagle was worse than death itself. It was a disgrace that could never be washed away. The eagle represented the power of Rome, the approval of the gods, and the honor of every man who served under it. The 9th Legion's eagle had been blessed by priests, carried through countless victories, and had never been lost in battle. Never. But let's get back to their military record. The 9th Legion's service record reads like a catalog of Roman conquests. They fought in Gaul alongside Caesar, helping to subjugate the fierce Celtic tribes. They were there when Caesar invaded Britain in 55 BCE. Yes, they had been to Britain before, and they knew exactly what they were dealing with. They served in the German campaigns, fighting against the savage tribes beyond the Rhine. They were veterans of the Pannonian Revolt, one of the most brutal conflicts of the early empire. These men had seen it all. And here's something that will give you chills. When Emperor Claudius launched his successful invasion of Britain in 43 CE, the 9th Legion was in the first wave. They weren't strangers to British soil. They were conquerors returning to finish what Caesar had started. For nearly 80 years, they had been stationed in Britain, primarily at their fortress in Eboracum, modern-day York. They had fought the Iceni under Queen Boudica, survived the devastating rebellion that nearly drove Rome from Britain entirely. Now imagine being one of these soldiers. You've spent your entire adult life serving Rome. You've watched your comrades die in battles across the known world. You've seen civilizations rise and fall. You carry scars from a dozen different wars. And then, in 120 CE, you receive your orders, march north. Pacify the Caledonians, secure the frontier. It should have been routine. After all, what enemy could stand against the might of Rome? What barbarian tribe could challenge veterans who had conquered half the world? But here's the thing about history. Sometimes the most experienced soldiers walk into the most unexpected disasters. The 9th Legion's final campaign began like any other. 5,000 men, perfectly organized, supremely confident, marching in formation toward what they believed would be another victory for Rome. They had no idea they were marching toward their own legend. The year was 120 CE. Emperor Hadrian had just arrived in Britain, and he was not pleased with what he found. The northern frontier was in chaos. Caledonian tribes, the ancestors of the Scots, were launching increasingly bold raids into Roman territory. Roman settlements were being attacked, supply lines were being cut, and the empire's northern border was becoming a bleeding wound. But here's what's truly puzzling. We know Hadrian arrived in Britain. We know he eventually ordered the construction of the famous wall that bears his name. But what happened in between? That's where our mystery begins. The historical record gives us tantalizing clues, but frustratingly few concrete facts. What we do know is this. Sometime around 120 CE, the 9th Legion received orders to march north from their base in York. Their mission? To deal with the Caledonian problem once and for all. Now let me ask you something. If you were a Roman general planning a campaign against rebellious tribes, what would you expect to happen? You'd expect resistance, certainly. You'd expect casualties. You'd expect to win, but you'd also expect to send reports back to Rome describing your victories and losses. But here's what's absolutely chilling about the 9th Legion's final campaign. There were no reports, no dispatches, no requests for reinforcements, no victory announcements, no casualty lists, nothing. The 9th Legion marched north, and then silence. Now you might be thinking, maybe they were just cut off from communication for a while. But remember, this was the Roman Empire at its height. They had the most sophisticated communication network in the ancient world. Messages traveled along well-maintained roads carried by professional couriers who could cover incredible distances. A legion didn't just go quiet unless something catastrophic had happened. The first sign that something was wrong came when supply convoys sent north returned without making contact. Then when messenger after messenger failed to return, Roman commanders began to realize they weren't dealing with a simple communication breakdown. They were dealing with a disaster. But here's where the mystery deepens. What could have happened to 5,000 veteran soldiers? These weren't raw recruits. They were professional warriors at the peak of their training and experience. Let's consider the numbers for a moment. A full-strength legion in 120 CE consisted of about 5,000 men, organized into 10 cohorts. They were supported by auxiliary troops, engineers, and specialists. We're talking about a force that could have numbered close to 6,000 men when you include all the support personnel. That's not a patrol that could simply disappear. That's a small city's worth of people, complete with baggage trains, siege equipment, and enough supplies to sustain a prolonged campaign. And yet they vanished as completely as if the earth had swallowed them whole. Now here's a question that historians have been debating for centuries. Is it possible for an entire legion to be destroyed so completely that no trace remains? Keep that question in mind, because the answer might surprise you. The Roman historian Tacitus, who was writing at roughly the same time as these events, mentions conflicts in northern Britain, but provides no clear account of what happened to the 9th Legion. This is significant because Tacitus was usually meticulous about recording military disasters. Cassius Dio, another historian, mentions troubles in Britain that required Hadrian's personal attention, but again, no specific mention of the 9th Legion's fate. It's as if the Roman historians were deliberately avoiding the subject. But why? What could have been so terrible that the greatest military historians of the ancient world refused to write about it? Here's what we know for certain. By 130 CE, when Hadrian's wall was completed, the 9th Legion was no longer listed among the active legions of the Roman Empire. Their name simply disappears from the military records. But their eagle standard, that disappears too. Remember what I told you earlier about the significance of the Eagle Standard? Losing it was the ultimate disgrace. If the Ninth Legion had been defeated in battle, if their eagle had been captured, it would have been the biggest news in the empire. Romans would have been talking about it for generations. But instead, we have silence. The implications of this silence are staggering. It suggests that whatever happened to the Ninth Legion was so catastrophic, so complete, that it shook the Roman Empire to its core. And here's the most unsettling part. Hadrian's immediate response to the disappearance wasn't to send another legion north to investigate. Instead, he ordered the construction of a massive wall across the entire width of Britain. 73 miles of stone and steel, garrisoned by thousands of soldiers. Think about what that tells us. The Romans weren't just building a border fortification, they were building a barrier between themselves and whatever had destroyed the Ninth Legion. For nearly 2,000 years, historians, archaeologists, and mystery enthusiasts have proposed theories about what happened to the Ninth Legion. Some are plausible, others are fantastical, but all of them attempt to explain one of history's greatest disappearances. Let's examine the most compelling theories, and I'll let you decide which one you find most convincing. Theory 1, the Caledonian Massacre. The most popular theory suggests that the Ninth Legion was ambushed and completely destroyed by a coalition of Caledonian tribes in the Scottish highlands. Here's how it might have happened. The Roman column, confident in their superiority, advanced along one of the mountain passes. The Caledonians, who knew the terrain intimately, waited for the perfect moment to strike. Picture this: 5,000 Roman soldiers stretched out in a long column, unable to deploy into their traditional battle formations because of the narrow mountain pass. Suddenly, from every ridge, every hidden position, thousands of Celtic warriors emerge. The Romans, caught in what military historians call a killing ground, would have been unable to use their greatest advantages: their discipline, their formations, their coordinated tactics. Instead, they would have been forced to fight as individuals in terrain that favored their enemies. But here's what makes this theory compelling. The Caledonians weren't just any barbarian tribe. They were the descendants of warriors who had been fighting Romans for over a century. They had learned Roman tactics, studied Roman weaknesses, and they were fighting for their homeland. The Roman historian Tacitus actually provides us with some insight into Caledonian military capability. He describes them as fierce warriors who used the terrain to their advantage and were skilled at guerrilla warfare. But here's the problem with this theory. Where are the bodies? Where are the weapons? Where is the archaeological evidence of such a massive battle? You'd expect to find something. Armor fragments, weapons, coins, the remains of baggage trains. But despite extensive archaeological surveys of the Scottish highlands, no definitive battlefield has ever been found. Theory 2, the plague. Some historians suggest that the Ninth Legion wasn't destroyed by enemies, but by disease. In the ancient world, armies were particularly vulnerable to epidemic diseases, and we know that plagues periodically swept through the Roman Empire. Consider this scenario. The legion advances into the Scottish wilderness, but they're carrying more than just weapons and supplies. They're carrying a deadly pathogen, perhaps something they picked up from contact with local populations, or maybe something that had been spreading through the empire. Within weeks, the disease tears through the legion. Soldiers begin falling ill, then dying. The surviving officers, desperate to prevent the plague from spreading back to Roman Britain, make a terrible decision. They order the burning of bodies, the destruction of contaminated equipment, and the quarantine of the entire force. The legion doesn't return because there's no legion left to return. This theory would explain the complete disappearance. Bodies consumed by disease and fire, equipment destroyed to prevent contamination, and the survivors either dying in isolation or being absorbed into local populations. But again, there's a problem. Romans were meticulous record keepers, especially when it came to military disasters. A plague that destroyed an entire legion would have been documented, if only to prevent similar disasters in the future. Theory 3, the mutiny. Here's a theory that might shock you. What if the Ninth Legion wasn't destroyed by enemies at all? What if they destroyed themselves? Consider the psychological state of these soldiers. They had been stationed in Britain for decades. Many had married local women, had children, had established roots. They were veterans who had served the empire faithfully, but they were also men who might have been growing tired of endless warfare. Now imagine receiving orders to march north into hostile territory for what might have been their final campaign. Some historians suggest that the Legion might have mutinied, refusing to march to what they saw as certain death. But here's where this theory gets really interesting. What if the mutiny was successful? What if the 9th Legion simply left? They could have dispersed into the civilian population, abandoned their military identities, and started new lives. The Eagle standard might have been hidden or destroyed to prevent anyone from tracking them down. This would explain why there's no battlefield, no archaeological evidence, and no official records. The Roman Empire would have been deeply embarrassed by such a massive mutiny and might have chosen to simply pretend the Legion never existed. Theory 4, the transfer. Some modern historians argue that the 9th Legion wasn't destroyed at all. They were simply transferred to another part of the empire, and the records were lost or destroyed. Archaeological evidence suggests that some members of the 9th Legion may have been stationed in the Netherlands around 120 CE. There's also evidence that Legion subunits might have been transferred to the Rhine frontier. But here's the problem with this theory. It doesn't explain why the Legion's name disappears from all subsequent records, or why their Eagle standard was never mentioned again. Theory 5, the cover-up. Now here's the most disturbing theory of all. What if the Roman Empire knew exactly what happened to the 9th Legion, but chose to cover it up? Consider this. What if the Legion wasn't just defeated, but defeated in such a humiliating way that admitting it would have damaged the Empire's reputation beyond repair? What if the defeat was so complete, so shocking, that it revealed fundamental weaknesses in Roman military doctrine? The Romans were masters of propaganda. They knew how to spin defeats into victories, how to minimize disasters, how to control information. But what if this disaster was so catastrophic that even their propaganda machine couldn't handle it? Hadrian's decision to build a wall across Britain starts to make more sense when viewed through this lens. He wasn't just securing a frontier, he was drawing a line in the sand, literally and figuratively, saying, "This far and no further." The wall wasn't just a defensive barrier, it was a statement. We will not repeat the mistake that cost us the 9th Legion. But here's the question that haunts historians. If there was a cover-up, what were they covering up? What could have been so terrible that an empire that prided itself on military glory would choose to forget one of its most decorated legions? For over a century, archaeologists have been searching for physical evidence of the 9th Legion's fate. Their investigations have taken them from the muddy fields of Yorkshire to the remote highlands of Scotland. And what they've found, and what they haven't found, tells a story of its own. Let me take you on this archaeological journey, because the absence of evidence is sometimes as telling as the presence of evidence. The York excavations. The search began in York, the 9th Legion's last known base. If we were going to find clues about their disappearance, logic suggested we should start where they were last seen. Excavations at York have revealed a fascinating picture of Roman military life. We found barracks, bathhouses, administrative buildings, and countless personal artifacts belonging to the soldiers who lived there. But here's what's interesting. The archaeological record shows clear signs of the base being abandoned around 120 CE, but it wasn't abandoned in haste. There are no signs of battle damage, no evidence of a sudden evacuation. Instead, the evidence suggests an orderly withdrawal, as if the Legion packed up their belongings and marched away, never to return. Archaeologists have found personal items left behind. Letters from home, dice games, religious tokens. These aren't the possessions of soldiers expecting to return. They're the possessions of men who knew they were leaving forever. The Scottish surveys. The real treasure hunt began in Scotland, where teams of archaeologists have spent decades searching for any trace of the 9th Legion's final campaign. Using metal detectors, ground-penetrating radar, and aerial photography, researchers have covered hundreds of square miles of Scottish countryside. They've investigated every reported Roman artifact, every suspicious mound, every local legend about Roman gold. And what have they found? Roman coins scattered across the highlands, fragments of Roman armor buried in peat bogs, pieces of Roman equipment often found in rivers and lakes. But here's what's puzzling. These artifacts are scattered across a vast area, with no concentration that would suggest a major battle site. It's as if the Legion was spread out over hundreds of miles when disaster struck. The artifact analysis. Let's examine some of the specific finds because they tell a story of their own. In 1996, archaeologists working near the town of Kirimuir discovered a Roman helmet buried in a peat bog. The helmet bore the markings of the 9th Legion, but it had been deliberately damaged, not by battle, but by human hands. Someone had taken a hammer to it, destroying the Legion's insignia. Why would someone deliberately destroy a Roman helmet? The only logical explanation is that they were trying to hide evidence of the Legion's presence. In 2003, metal detector enthusiasts found a cache of Roman coins near Stirling. The coins were all dated to around 120 CE, and they had been buried in a leather pouch. But here's the strange part. The coins were in perfect condition, as if they had been buried immediately after being minted. This suggests that someone, possibly a fleeing Roman soldier, had buried their pay rather than let it fall into enemy hands. The missing eagle. But the most significant absence in the archaeological record is the 9th Legion's eagle standard. Despite decades of searching, no trace of this sacred symbol has ever been found. This is highly unusual. Throughout the Roman Empire, archaeologists have found numerous examples of military standards, Legion emblems, and ceremonial eagles. These objects were often buried with honor, hidden during defeats, or captured and displayed by victorious enemies. But the 9th Legion's eagle has vanished as completely as the Legion itself. Some historians suggest that the eagle was captured by the Caledonians and later destroyed or lost. Others believe it was hidden so well that it remains buried somewhere in Scotland, waiting to be discovered. The tombstone evidence. Perhaps the most intriguing archaeological evidence comes from tombstones and memorial inscriptions found throughout the former Roman Empire. In several locations, including sites in Germany, Romania, and even North Africa, archaeologists have found tombstones commemorating soldiers who served with the 9th Legion. But here's the curious part. These tombstones are all dated to the period after 120 CE. What does this tell us? It suggests that some members of the 9th Legion survived whatever happened in Scotland and went on to serve in other parts of the empire. But they were no longer part of the 9th Legion. They had been transferred to other units, their original military identity erased. The DNA studies. In recent years, archaeologists have begun using DNA analysis to trace the movements of ancient populations. Some researchers have suggested that genetic evidence might help solve the mystery of the 9th Legion. Studies of Highland Scottish populations have revealed genetic markers that could indicate Roman ancestry. While this is far from conclusive, it raises an intriguing possibility. What if some members of the 9th Legion survived by integrating into local populations? The modern search. The search for the 9th Legion continues today, aided by modern technology that would have amazed earlier generations of archaeologists. Satellite imagery has revealed previously unknown Roman sites throughout Scotland. Ground-penetrating radar has identified buried structures that might be connected to the Legion's final campaign. Even underwater archaeology has been employed, searching Scottish locks for artifacts that might have been thrown into the water during the Legion's final battle. But despite all these technological advances, the 9th Legion's fate remains a mystery. Here's what I find most fascinating about the archaeological evidence. It's not the presence of artifacts that's most significant. It's their distribution. The scattered nature of the finds suggests that the 9th Legion didn't meet its end in a single catastrophic battle. Instead, it seems to have been dispersed across a wide area, possibly over an extended period. This raises a disturbing possibility. What if the Legion's disappearance wasn't sudden? What if it was gradual, the result of a campaign that slowly ground down the Roman force until nothing remained? The disappearance of the Ninth Legion wasn't just a military disaster, it was a turning point that changed the course of history. To understand how the loss of one legion could have such far-reaching consequences, we need to examine the ripple effects that spread outward from that Scottish wilderness. The immediate impact, Hadrian's Wall. The most visible consequence of the Ninth Legion's disappearance was Hadrian's Wall, but the story behind its construction reveals just how deeply the loss affected Roman strategy. When Hadrian ordered the wall's construction in 122 CE, he wasn't just building a frontier fortification. He was admitting something that no Roman emperor had ever admitted before. There were limits to Roman power. Think about what this meant. For over 2 centuries, Rome had been expanding relentlessly. Every setback had been followed by a comeback. Every defeat had been answered with victory. The Roman Empire was built on the idea that Roman will was unstoppable. But the Ninth Legion's disappearance changed that. For the first time, Rome was saying, "This far and no further." The wall itself tells the story. 73 miles of stone and mortar, punctuated by forts, mile castles, and watchtowers. It required over 15,000 soldiers to build and man. The resources devoted to this project were enormous, resources that could have been used for conquest elsewhere. But here's what's really significant. The wall wasn't just built to keep the Caledonians out. It was built to keep Roman soldiers in. After the Ninth Legion's disappearance, Roman commanders were terrified of another such disaster. The wall ensured that no future legion could simply vanish into the Scottish wilderness. The strategic shift. The loss of the Ninth Legion forced a fundamental change in Roman military strategy. Before 120 CE, Roman tactics emphasized aggressive expansion, rapid conquest, and the projection of power into hostile territory. After 120 CE, Roman strategy became increasingly defensive. The empire stopped expanding and began consolidating. The age of conquest was over. The age of maintenance had begun. This shift had profound implications. Roman legions that had been trained for conquest now found themselves stationed on defensive frontiers. The military culture that had built the empire was gradually replaced by a garrison mentality. And here's the crucial point. This defensive mindset didn't just affect Britain, it spread throughout the empire. Roman commanders everywhere became more cautious, more reluctant to take risks, more focused on holding what they had rather than taking what they wanted. The recruitment crisis. The disappearance of the Ninth Legion also created a crisis in military recruitment. Remember, these weren't just any soldiers. They were experienced veterans with decades of service. Their loss represented not just a numerical reduction in Roman military strength, but a massive loss of institutional knowledge and experience. But the problem went deeper than just numbers. The Ninth Legion had been one of Rome's most prestigious units. Young men throughout the empire had aspired to serve in such elite formations. When news of the Legion's disappearance spread, it shattered the myth of Roman invincibility. Recruitment became more difficult. Soldiers became more reluctant to serve in frontier postings. The army that had once been the empire's greatest strength was beginning to show signs of weakness. The economic impact. The construction of Hadrian's Wall and the permanent garrison it required represented a massive economic burden. Historians estimate that the wall cost the equivalent of several years' worth of imperial revenue to build and man. But the economic impact went beyond construction costs. The wall represented a fundamental shift in how the empire allocated resources. Instead of investing in conquest and expansion, which historically had paid for themselves through plunder and tribute, Rome was now investing in defense. This shift had cascading effects throughout the imperial economy. Fewer conquests meant less plunder. Defensive garrisons consumed resources without generating revenue. The empire's growth model was beginning to break down. The psychological impact. Perhaps the most significant impact of the Ninth Legion's disappearance was psychological. The Roman Empire was built on the idea of Roman superiority, the belief that Roman civilization, Roman law, and Roman military might were destined to rule the world. The loss of an entire legion challenged that belief. If Rome could lose 5,000 experienced soldiers without trace, what did that say about Roman power? If barbarian tribes could defeat Roman legions, what did that say about Roman superiority? This psychological impact was felt throughout the empire. In Britain, Roman settlers began to question their security. In other frontier provinces, local populations began to wonder whether Roman rule was as permanent as they had believed. And in Rome itself, the political class began to grapple with the implications of imperial limits. The age of unlimited expansion was over, and no one was quite sure what would replace it. The domino effect. The disappearance of the Ninth Legion set off a chain reaction that would ultimately contribute to the fall of the Roman Empire. Here's how. First, the shift from expansion to defense changed the empire's economic model. Instead of conquering new territories to fund the army, Rome now had to fund the army to protect existing territories. Second, the loss of military prestige made recruitment more difficult, leading to increased reliance on foreign mercenaries and barbarian foederati. Third, the defensive mentality that emerged after the Ninth Legion's disappearance made Roman commanders less willing to take the aggressive action necessary to deal with emerging threats. And finally, the psychological impact of the Legion's disappearance contributed to a broader crisis of confidence that would plague the empire for centuries. The alternative history. Let me pose a question that historians love to debate. What if the Ninth Legion had never disappeared? What if they had successfully completed their mission in Scotland and returned to York with another victory for Rome? The implications are staggering. Without the shock of losing an entire legion, Hadrian might never have built his wall. Roman expansion might have continued northward, potentially bringing all of Britain under Roman control. The resources devoted to defending the northern frontier could have been used for expansion elsewhere. The psychological trauma of military defeat might have been avoided, maintaining Roman confidence and military prestige. But perhaps most significantly, the Roman Empire might have maintained its expansionist momentum for decades longer, potentially changing the entire course of European history. The disappearance of the Ninth Legion was more than just a military disaster. It was a turning point that marked the beginning of the end for Roman expansion, and ultimately for the Roman Empire itself. As we reach the end of our journey into one of history's greatest mysteries, let's consider what the story of the Ninth Legion tells us about the nature of history itself, the fragility of even the greatest empires, and the enduring power of unsolved mysteries. The eternal question. After nearly 2,000 years, the question remains, what happened to the Ninth Legion? Despite decades of archaeological investigation, historical analysis, and scientific inquiry, we still don't have a definitive answer. But perhaps that's the point. The mystery of the Ninth Legion reminds us that history is not a complete record of the past, but a collection of fragments, clues, and educated guesses. There are some questions that may never be answered, some mysteries that will endure forever, and maybe that's as it should be. The disappearance of the Ninth Legion has inspired countless books, films, and investigations. It has captured imaginations and sparked curiosity for generations. Would we lose something if the mystery were suddenly solved? The human story behind all the historical analysis and archaeological evidence, we must remember that the Ninth Legion was composed of real people. Fathers, sons, brothers, friends. Each of the 5,000 men who marched north in 120 CE had a story, a family, a life that was cut short. Imagine being a family member waiting for news that never came. Imagine being a wife in York, watching the gates day after day, hoping to see your husband return. Imagine being a child who never saw their father again. The disappearance of the Ninth Legion wasn't just a military disaster. It was a human tragedy on a massive scale. The modern relevance. The story of the Ninth Legion has surprising relevance for our modern world. In an age of instant communication and global connectivity, it's hard to imagine how an entire military unit could simply vanish without trace. But the lesson of the Ninth Legion is that even the most powerful institutions, the most advanced civilizations, the most skilled organizations can face sudden, catastrophic failure. The Roman Empire at its height was the most sophisticated political and military organization the world had ever seen. And yet it could lose an entire legion without understanding how or why. This reminds us that power, no matter how great, is ultimately fragile. Success, no matter how complete, is ultimately temporary. And mystery, no matter how ancient, is ultimately enduring. The continuing search. The search for the Ninth Legion continues today. New archaeological techniques, advancing technology, and fresh perspectives continue to shed light on this ancient mystery. In recent years, researchers have used satellite imagery to identify previously unknown Roman sites in Scotland. Ground-penetrating radar has revealed buried structures that might be connected to the Legion's final campaign. DNA analysis has opened new possibilities for understanding the fate of individual soldiers. And who knows? Tomorrow, a metal detector enthusiast might uncover a cache of Roman weapons. Next year, an archaeological excavation might reveal a battlefield that has been hidden for 2 millennia. In the next decade, advancing technology might finally provide the answer to this ancient puzzle. The enduring mystery. But until that day comes, the mystery of the Ninth Legion continues to fascinate and inspire. It reminds us that history is not a closed book, but an ongoing investigation. It shows us that even the most powerful empires can face sudden, catastrophic defeat. And it demonstrates that some stories are more powerful for being incomplete. The Ninth Legion marched into history and into legend. Their disappearance marked the end of Roman expansion and the beginning of Roman decline. Their fate remains one of archaeology's greatest challenges and history's most enduring mysteries. So, what happened to the lost Roman legion that changed history forever? After about 40 minutes of investigation, examination, and speculation, we still don't know for certain. But we do know this: their disappearance was more than just a military disaster. It was a turning point that changed the course of an empire and ultimately the course of history itself. The Ninth Legion's story reminds us that history is full of mysteries, that power is fragile, and that some questions may never be answered. But it also reminds us that the search for answers, the human drive to understand the past, is one of our greatest strengths. Perhaps the real legacy of the Ninth Legion is not in what happened to them, but in what they represent. The enduring human fascination with mystery, the relentless pursuit of truth, and the recognition that some stories are too important to be forgotten, even when they can't be fully understood. The eagles of the Ninth Legion may be lost forever, but their legend lives on. And as long as there are mysteries to be solved and stories to be told, the search for the truth about Rome's lost legion will continue.